All right. Thank you, Joseph. So I'll be sharing my screen shortly. If it's visible, do let me know. Uh, okay. Is my screen visible? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Okay. And okay, you can see in full screen now, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This is actually my first presentation or workshop with Akisel, and I'd like to say thank you for availing yourself this evening. Yeah, so as Joseph said, I've been a partner with Akisel for some time, worked on different solutions with them, and today I'll be presenting I'll say a little on overcoming the limitations of USSD application development. Uh, so the agenda is very simple. We're going to go through the introduction part, and we're going to go through some brainstorming, and we're going to take a look at some practical use cases as well. So to introduce myself, uh, I'm Alexander Kumsen, as Joseph rightly said. I'm a backend engineer with Solve, and I have a lot of experience actually with provisioning and supporting value-added services at scale. Okay, so when it comes to bulk SMS, when it comes to USSD, when it comes to short code, all these things, email marketing, amongst others, right? That's kind of my niche, and that's something I do very well. So today we'll be looking at like some few things. So the brainstorming sessions are very simple and straightforward. So we are going to look at understanding the constraints of USSD development. We're going to look at optimizing user experiences with USSD development as well. We'll be looking at dealing with session timeout, dealing with network issues and latency, and we'll look at efficient data management and storage when it comes to USSD applications. And we'll also look at some design patterns that would help you, right, in your USSD workflows, right, to make your life a bit simpler, right? So one of the major challenges we have with USSD development is session length, right? If you Okay, so before I continue, I'd like to state that this session is for someone who has actually developed a USSD application before, right? Because most of the things we'll be talking about, though it will benefit those who are new to the field, it's a bit more detailed and would give you a bit more knowledge into the nitty-gritties of how things work when it comes to USSD development. Okay, so the first thing is session length, right? So when it comes to USSD development, that's one of the major challenges. So the sessions users have to interact with your USSD applications are very short. In total, there's about the between the user and your application, you basically have about between 60 to, let's say, between 70 to, let's say, 120 seconds, give or take, right? And out of this 60 to 120 seconds, right, uh, between 50, let's say 50 to 60 seconds of that actual time belongs to the end user, right? The end user of your application, right? So you, uh, as a developer, have about roughly about 10 to 20 seconds to respond to every USSD request, right? Which makes your session time at the back end or on your application very short. Now, USSD applications, if you've worked with them before or tried it before, you realize they are stateless in nature, right? So session management is not handled for you. So you have to do it yourself, basically. You have to find a way to manage the session of each user, track the progress of each user across your USSD application. Also, USSD applications have limited characters per response. So by default, you So by default, the GSM network is 7-bit. So by default, you have roughly about, let's say, 160 characters, give or take. I know some telcos do a little lower, so let's say 140 to 160 uh, within that region, right? But any straight 7-bit network operator is going to give you about 160 characters. But let's say you have between uh, 140 to 160, okay? Because not all telcos are the same, not all their infrastructures are the same. So they technically they should be able to provide you with that, but it doesn't work across board, right? Also, menu depth restrictions. So menu depth restriction is something that you have to develop USSD applications over a period of time to actually experience it. So for that, it's a limitation when it comes to you having a lot of menus, right? You have a lot of menus and the user navigates down and down and down and down. And after a period, when the session closes, the user still has uh, this fictional user interface that allows them to enter a figure or anything but doesn't give them any response, right? So that's also one of the strange restrictions that are there. There's network dependency, okay? So network dependency, basically your cell tower where you are, if you dial the USSD code on your phone, how fast it gets to the cell tower, how fast it gets to the telco, how fast it gets to Arcacell, and then in turn gets to your application, right? So network dependency is also one of the limitations. There's no graphics, there's no multimedia. You can't do anything multimedia or graphics. That's also one of the limitations. There are also limited user input options, right? So receiving the kind of information you can receive from a USSD, you know, it's not the kind of information you can receive from a web application. It's just purely text, right? And with the pure text of it, there's also a limit to the number of text you can actually input there, right? And then the last limitation that I put on the slide is carrier dependency. So that's your telco's dependency. So as I mentioned earlier, every telco is different, right? Though they all follow the GSM network protocol, every telco is different in the way they handle these kind of USSD sessions, and then the communication between your cell phone or your end user cell phone and then your application. We're going to dive deep into how the GSM network works a bit so that we can all have a fair idea of what to expect as developers, right? Yeah, so this is a simple diagram I put together on how the USSD flow works actually from the handset. Okay, so from the handset, if you should dial the code on your handset, let's say for example you dial *1234, it hits your cell tower. That's the nearest cell tower that you are close to, right? And I mentioned before, it's over the GSM network. And for those of us who don't know what USSD is, I'm guessing you should know, but in case you don't know, it actually means unstructured supplementary data service. And it's a communication protocol, right? So it's just like you have other protocols, it's also a communication protocol, but this time it's over the GSM network. So unlike data or call, right, this one is a bit different in the sense that it's purely text, right? So let me continue. When you dial the short code, the USSD code, what happens is that it hits your nearest cell tower. And when it hits your cell tower, it actually finds it initiates a request, right, to something they call the HLR or the VLR. The HLR simply means the home location. What's the meaning? I think it's home location register. Yeah. So it's your home location register, and VLR means I think visitor location register. Yeah. So when it gets here, this is a way of authenticating to the USSD gateway of the telco. Now, the work of the HLR and the VLR I just want you to understand. That's why I'm going a bit into detail. Uh, the work of this thing basically is to be able to track the user who dialed the code, right? To find out where the code is mapped to on the network, to find out which gateway it has to hit on the telco, and in turn, the telco will now route it down, right? So between this guy and this guy, the two of them keep track of your search, the location of your handset, the session you initialized, right? Keeps track of how long your session is, right? This is responsible, this is configured by the telcos, and it's actually responsible for authenticating to this gateway. So if you dial like any USSD code that doesn't exist, it actually hits this and then comes back to you, right? Because there's no mapping directly to any gateway of the telco, right? So now when it gets to the telco then forwards it to Akisel, in this case, Akisel, because Akisel is a partner that provides USSD services, but it could be any USSD provider basically. So what the telcos do is that on their gateway, they configure Akisel's gateway as a client or as a customer to their USSD services. And based on the USSD code that is configured here for Akisel, this guy appropriately forwards it to the URL provided by Akisel to them for that specific USSD code, right? And then Akisel in turn looks at the USSD code, looks at the extension, looks at the anatomy of everything, and then correctly forwards it to your USSD application, right? After the request hits your USSD application and there's a response, it goes back through that same process. But this time around, when it gets here, it gets mapped back to the session that was created for you on your home location resource, okay, or your let me just say your home location network, okay, because these two things work hand in hand, right? So this is responsible for knowing your location. This is responsible for basically creating your session, configuring the USSD code, and then forwarding it to the appropriate endpoint that's being configured, right? So that's how everything works, and it goes back to the handset. Now, the first limitation we spoke about was session length, right? And with this diagram, I'd want to explain the session length a little. Now, I mentioned initially that when we take the worst case scenario, you have roughly about 120 seconds, right, for every USSD session. Now, out of that 120 seconds, most often than not, most telcos configure it so that 60 seconds of that lives here. Okay, so when a response is on this handset, the end user has about 60 seconds to enter something and submit back to you, right? So when you take that 60 seconds out, you have roughly, let's say, about 40, right, to go through. You have roughly about, let's say, another 60 to go through this whole process, right? But one thing I've noticed is that most telcos have shorter, should I say, sessions, right? But most of them provide the 60 seconds here, right? So it means that on your USSD application, your response time should be relatively fast. That is, when I say relatively fast, I'm saying between 0 to, let's say, 10 seconds, right? So if you can provide your response mostly under 10 seconds, you are able to I say, beat this whole timeout thing that the USSD session have, the whole session lifespan of the USSD. Okay. So we'll go to our next screen and we'll talk about optimizing uh, some of our USSD workflows as developers, right? Within the constraints we have, right? Now, there's a constraint on the number of characters you have to show to the end users, right? So the first thing is you have to keep your menus very simple, very short, right? So an example I normally give is, for instance, if you are creating a banking application as as a USSD developer, right? You shouldn't have so much text on your screen. Maybe, for instance, you have one, uh, should I say, instead of one, like pay, you have one, pay for A. Then you have two, pay for this. Then you have three, pay for this. The number of characters you have are not enough, right? So you have to leverage on what you have, which is the limited number of characters you have, to make meaning to your end user, right? The next thing is that you have to leverage a lot on numeric input. Instead of, let's say, receiving text all the time, right? You can help the end user navigate to your destination by receiving numeric inputs, right? And guiding the end user to your destination, right? The next one is session persistence and then flow optimization. I mentioned initially that USSD applications are stateless by default. So as a developer, you need to manage your sessions, right? How do you do that effectively? You do that by ensuring that each should I say each transition, right, of a screen is persisted, right? You keep track of the user's journey across your application. The next one is to optimize your user experience, you have to provide clear navigations with exit options. If I'm on the fifth screen and I want to go back to the first screen, it should be easy for me. If I want to go a step back, it should be easy for me. If I want to quit the application, it should be easy for me, right? As an end user. Now, you have to also learn to limit the number of steps you have in a single session. Now, for instance, if you are using your USSD application for surveys, right? Some surveys can take a lot of time because of the kind of information you are looking for from the end user, right? So you have to know how to limit the number of steps you have, right? And how to manage the session so that the end user doesn't feel like he or she is doing too much work to complete your survey, right? Or to perform the action he or she wants. So the next thing is also to provide immediate feedback for the end user. So for instance, if you are processing payment, you can give the user a response, give them an immediate feedback that, oh, I'm performing some long running task, right? So for the meantime, I'm working on it. So you can try again in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, you can try again later, or as we do for payment options, a screen will pop up, blah, 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 right? So make sure you give immediate feedback and optimize your error handling as well and provide help tips where possible. Okay. Now, so example menus, right, that are simple. Welcome to ABC Bank. Number one, check your balance. Check your balance. Any customer looking at it knows what checking my balance entails, right? Transfer money, buy airtime. Now, if you have more than one option you would like to display on your screen, you have the option to also give them more options, like four more options, right? So you can go navigate to the next screen to see what other kind of should I say of transactions we have in store for this application, right? Now, the next one is providing clear navigations. This is an example of providing clear navigations. I want to go back, right? I'm deeply nested or I'm lost. I want to go back. I want to see where I started from. I want to go a step or two back, right? Or I'm in the wrong place. I don't want to cancel out and start all over again, right? I want to go back. How do I go back? You provide clear navigation options, right? Now, the next thing on the agenda is latency, right? And most of this presentation is it has been prepared based on my experience, actually. And the demo we are going to have is also based on my experience, and it's based on, should I say, a proprietary solution I provided for a user. I'm going to take you through the whole memory map of developing a USSD application, right? So let's talk about latency. Back to latency. So we have to find ways and means to handle session timeouts proactively, right? You are performing a long background task. You know this thing will take some time, and you know that the session would definitely time out. It's good to tell the user that try again later because of A, B, C, and D, or we are working on your current request. Try again in 5 minutes, or try again in the. It's good to be proactive and give feedback rather than to let the user wait for the session to time out, right? Minimize the number of steps and the number of inputs required. For instance, you can't always ask the user to keep entering information, right? We mentioned initially that use numeric inputs as much as possible to reduce the boredom you create on the end user, right? So minimize the number of steps and the number of inputs required. Allow the users to resume their session after disconnection. So if you remember, we mentioned that these constraints here, there are some that are within our control, there are some that are not within our control, and there are some of them we can't do anything about them. Number one, carrier dependency. If you are on a network and you find yourself in a village and you dial the USSD code and it's taking so long to even reach the cell tower, to hit the HLR, to hit the operator's gateway, and to even come to your USSD application, and it's taking so long. Those ones, there's nothing you can do about it, right? Now, network dependency. For instance, if you are in a location where when it rains, the network is slow, there's nothing you can do about that, right? The session length. There's nothing you can't increase the length of the session, right? By default, if it's, let's say, 110 or 120, or let's say 50 or 70 seconds, you can't on your own increase it to whatever figure you want, right? There isn't really much you can do about that, right? But what you can do is to leverage on these limitations to make your user experience good for your end user, right? So back to where we were, right? Allow users to resume after disconnection. I find myself in a village. I'm on your banking app. I want to transact. In the process of transacting, it times out, or the telco just seizes my session because probably someone is making some long running call that requires my memory and all of that. And I have to resume or restart by dialing the code. As a USSD, find a way to enable the user to resume their session, because it's very painful to always start from the beginning. Example, if you are doing a survey and your survey is about 7 or 8 screens deep, and you are on the 7th screen and the session times out, and you dial the code again and you have to start from the beginning. It's a painful process for the end user, right? So as developers, that's one of the things we should be aiming for, actually. Now we should provide fast track option for frequent transaction. This is where it's possible. So you can build your USSD application to adapt to your users, right? For instance, every day when I dial your code, I always buy airtime. I always go through the menu and it's airtime I buy, right? You can look at my history and provide me with an option that whenever I dial your code, you take me to a place where if I want to buy airtime, I get to choose, but if I don't, I get to restart, or I get to exit, or I get to do something else, or I get to go back in time, right? This is if you can, right? And it depends on, should I say, the requirements of the USSD you are building, actually. Now, use clear and short error messages. So if there's an issue with your application, don't throw an exception from the back and expect the telco to handle it. Provide a clear and concise error message to the end user, right? So that they can either come back to resume their session or come back to start their session over again. Also, session persistence for all interactions. Now, if you want to be able to resume a user session, you should know where the person is at that point in time where there was a network issue, where there was a long running task, where there was an exception, or where there was an issue. You should know, right? So you should keep track of the user's interaction with the application. And this also helps you to build user focused USSD applications. USSD applications that are able to provide targeted feedback for users, right? Instead of every day, 1 for this, 2 for this, 3 for this, 4 for this. Okay. Now, the next one is I always say, as much as possible, make everything a background task if it is possible, right? In every USSD application, you have limited, we said it in the beginning, you have limited session length, right? Your application is stateless in nature, right? So when you are building your application, as much as possible, everything that you can put to the background to work as a background task, put it to the background, right? For instance, you want to keep track of the user journey. And this is not about managing your sessions, but you want to keep track of the user journey as metadata to develop, should I say, client-focused USSD applications, right? For something like that, it wouldn't always make sense to publish the final goal of the end user. Always publish it in sync, right? Most of these things should be performed as background tasks. Always perform them in the background. Wherever you can, perform it in the background. And always, I think I didn't put this here. Try to cache as much as possible, right? USSD applications, based on my experience, a lot of the work is based on caching. A lot of the work is based on caching. For example, you need to verify someone's Ghana card with the NIA API. When you hit it, sometimes it responds in time, sometimes it doesn't, right? Now, for every response that comes back in time, you can cache it so that if you have a returning user, at least for a specific period, you don't always need to hit the third-party API you are always depending on. Okay, so that is for this. So cache as much as possible. It's not on this slide, but it's something I think I omitted in this workflow. All right, so there's a diagram I put together for the network latency. So in summary, you should have an efficient way to manage your sessions. You should always optimize your queries. If your application is always executing queries to your database or to your cache store, make sure that everything you are writing is optimized. Okay, so I think I put it here. Use caching as much as possible. Where it's possible to compress the data, use as much compression as you can. Now, structured logs. Now, this is from a developer's perspective. Now, in troubleshooting your application, in troubleshooting network latency challenges, you should have a way of looking at your logs to make sense of what happened back in time. Now, you can't always tell the user, dial the code again, and then follow the process with the user. You should, by your logs, be able to tell what happened back in time, right? So a user complained about a specific challenge. When you pick the user's phone number because it's provided to you by the telco or by the operator, you should be able to know exactly what happened to that user's session, right? So as much as possible, and to make this thing easy on your eye, make sure you have structured logs. You can make them JSON, to make it easy for visualization, because I think that's what a lot of us are used to. You can use your object notations based on the language you are writing your USSD application in. You can use your object's way of performing a toString function, or your object's way of describing the data in an object, right? You can use that to find out what's actually happening in your application. And also, as I mentioned earlier, as much as possible, process information and long running tasks like emails, payments, amongst others, in the background, SMS in the background. Those things are things that shouldn't be in sync, right? Okay, now data management. I think we've touched on a lot of this coming through, like, because most of the USSD application processes leverage on the same thing. So we've spoken about session management and persistence. We've spoken about optimized queries, right? We've spoken about caching frequently accessed data, right? You know that this guy, every time he goes through this process, every time we need this, every time we have to fetch this, right? So for those frequently accessed information, try as much as possible to cache them in memory. On disk is a bit slow, but I think nowadays there are lots of in-memory solutions that allow you to achieve this. Okay, so as much as possible, try to cache in memory, right? Efficient data store design, designing your databases, structuring your databases, make sure that the design is efficient. Places where you are supposed to index because you are fetching data with those criteria quickly almost every time, make sure they are indexed, right? Portions of your data store where you don't fetch frequently, where you don't use them as parameters to fetch, that where you don't really need indexing, leave it out. Basically, that is for, should I say, a database design course or something, but make sure that as much as possible, whichever storage engine you are using or data store you are using, you are optimizing your queries and storing your data as in the most efficient way, right? The last thing is secure data handling, right? So for instance, if I'm supposed to enter a PIN, you have to give me a second layer of authentication aside my PIN to verify if I'm actually the one performing the action, right? So the action may be coming from my handset, but you have to find a way to also verify that I'm actually the one performing the action. And actually the PIN I've entered actually belongs to me as well, you know. So all these things, when you are storing your PIN, you should know there should be encrypted, either encrypted or hashed, right? Those are should I say, uh, uh, things that every developer must know, right? So those things, make sure that your data is secure, because one thing is that data in USSD, it's plain text, right from your phone to your USSD application. It's plain text, right? It can be read. So as much as possible, if you can encrypt the data that you are storing, that other people would feed on to perform, to generate their reports, to generate uh, views for the application and all that, make sure that secure data is always encrypted or is hashed and it's not in plain text that everyone can view, right? Okay, so some of the complex workflows. So I think if you've designed or developed USSD applications over a period of time, these things would come intuitively. I think there are lots more, but these are the simple ones we normally use, right? So example, the progressive disclosure. Let me start from the progressive disclosure. So for instance, it's easy to get a user bored using your USSD application if the person always has to type, right? Presenting so much information to the user to consume before the user chooses the option they want, most often than not, the user gets fatigued, the user makes mistakes, the user eventually drops off your application. So as much as possible, we mentioned initially that if you could use numeric inputs as much as possible, use them, because with that, you can guide your users, right? to the specific screens and the specific places you want them, so that when they are entering or they are providing information in plain text, they know that at least I've arrived or I've almost arrived, right? But if you ask them to provide information from the first screen, sometimes it gets boring, right? Now, the next one is the multi-step, the wizard pattern or the multi-step pattern, right? So for instance, instead of asking the user to provide so much information at a time, you segregate the information in a way that the user would have to navigate downstream to provide the next information, right? So that it makes uh, when your sessions are even deep, it makes it easy for the user to understand what he or she is doing, right? The next one is the confirmation pattern. That's mostly for transactions. Enter your PIN or your or thank you for using our application. A prompt would appear for you to complete your payment or something, right? Some sort of text that gives the user a confirmation that this particular transaction is a high risk transaction, basically. And mostly these are used for money kind of related things that require changing of passwords, changing of pins, and all those things, right? Things that are of high risk. Mostly we use the confirmation pattern where you allow the user to confirm an action before you allow them to proceed, or you proceed to perform that action. The next one is context aware and short messaging pattern. I think we've mentioned this also before, that keep your messages short. Keep your messages short. The messages on your screens, they should be short, right? Because there are session constraints and because should I say, there are session constraints, we know that, and because the user also has limited input, right? You should be guiding the user, right? You know you can't show all the information you want to show to the user, right? And sometimes even the user reading through the entire information, by the time they finish typing what you want them to type, the session has already timed out, right? So you provide short messages so that the end users can read and quickly respond, right? To the inputs that you require of them. I think there are a lot more, but based on my experience, these are, I think, the most used ones, right? So yeah, so we have some practical use cases. We have some challenges as well. We'll discuss a few challenges. I think I mentioned before that there are some challenges you can't do anything about it. For instance, if the network is slow and you are dialing and it's not responding, sometimes the session hasn't even been initiated, right? The telco has not even received the session, right? So the end user gets frustrated. Those things are some of the challenges, but there's really not much you can do about it. So now let's talk about some practical use cases. Okay, and for the practical use cases, I would be walking you through a proprietary solution I provided for a client some years back, right? But then I've made it a bit abstract as well, okay, so that uh, we don't breach so much of client confidentiality. Okay, so uh, let me, uh, okay, okay, so I've exited the screen and then customer journey. Right, so now let's talk about, can you guys see my screen? Is it visible?
Yes, we can see your the
And
Google
is it
Sheets.
large enough for everyone to see, or is
You
too
could
small?
probably try zooming in a bit.
Okay. Is it
Yeah,
visible?
yeah, this is good.
Okay. So what I've noticed based on my experience is that it's difficult, not like you can't, but it's difficult to develop USSD applications without having a blueprint, right? For instance, if you have a customer that requires you to develop a USSD application for them, Don't go straight to the point developing the USSD application. You are going to struggle a lot, right? What you should do in turn, rather, is to create what I call a memory map, right? Or a design of the solution, right? The transition, right? From screen to screen to make it easier for the user to understand and also to make it easier on you, right? So you can understand where you are starting from and where you are going. Now, as at the time I was creating that application, this is what I did, right? Now I also walk you through what I do nowadays, right? But during that period, during that time, it's quite some time back, but this is what I did. This is Google Sheet, right? I've should I say I've abstracted it a bit, so it shouldn't be that visible. So now, this is the home screen. When you dial one, when you dial the short code, these are the screens you should see. One for pay, two for register, three for get access, four for schedule exams, five for respond to survey, right? Now, when you select pay, what happens? There are three options you get. One, pay fees. Two, pay books. Three, other payments, right? So other to represent other payments. What you notice is that we are keeping the text descriptions as short as possible, right? We are trying to make it so that when the user sees it, the user kind of understands the journey he or she has to go through, right? Don't provide so much information for them to read, okay? Now, when the person selects pay school fees, now, for which student do you want to pay school fees? Enter the student's phone number. Then the next screen, enter the amount you want to pay. Then after you enter the amount, we now provide you a screen that says that a mobile payment request has been sent. Please approve as short as possible. Now, some of the codes or some of the payment providers have specific text that they want you to use on the screen, right? And during your UAT with them, during your interaction with them, they are going to tell you that, right? So you put that here, right? Now, when the person selects pay books, this is what I want to do. I want you to enter the grade for which you are paying the books for. I want you to enter the amount. I want you to enter the description, right? And then same process, a payment prompt will come up, right? So you give the person this message. And these actions, right? Now, these actions, you notice that Momo payment prompt, this should be a background task. This is not a task that you should do in sync. That once you are sending the Momo payment, once you send it to the provider, then you come and display the screen. No, you should forward this to a background task to handle it whilst you respond to the user so that the user can quickly close this session before this prompt shows up, right? So there are different ways of achieving this, but this is what I have found in my experience to be easier, right? And to be a lot more performant, right? Now, for instance, unsuccessful payment, when we have a payment, whether successful or failed, when we have the callback, we are supposed to send an SMS to the user. Aside the Momo SMS the person would see, we have to tell the person that we have actually received the payment or the payment you tried has failed, right? This is also a background task, right? So now this is how over the period I used to craft it, right? And whenever the user, I'm not going to go through all of them, but if you look at it, you realize it's fairly straightforward. Now, and after the user request for a lot more change, right? What I used to do then is that I create that one separately. So the user told me that for the pay option, this was what we agreed on, but talking to the payment provider, they wanted us to do something else, or they wanted us to reduce a specific process, right? So this is what we do. Now, you want to pay, but now we are not asking you pay fees, pay books, others. No, we are saying that the payment you are doing, is it for a student? Is it for a school? Is it other payments? Now, students pay school fees. Schools pay for books, right? Because the schools buy the books in bulk, right? These are other payments for maybe, let's say, a private tutoring session, or if you look at the code, you realize that there are some home tutoring, BC preparation, WASI remedial, vacation classes, and all those things, right? So with that, we know that those will fall under other payments. So based on the users or your should I say your requirements, or the requirements you have from the person you are working with, you can optimize the flow to make it a bit shorter, right? And to make it a bit more concise, right? Now, if there are modifications, so there was a new modification, and then that one, I also separated it out. This is what I used to do in the past, right? And this is easier to do, actually. Now for a lot more user interaction, this is what I do. I use Figma. Not everyone can do this, I know that, but it's just for knowledge sharing, right? So that you kind of know what to like expect. So for instance, this is what I do now. I try to, as much as possible, mimic the USSD flow, okay, so that the person who is requesting of you to develop the USSD for them has a feel of the application before you develop it. Now, this makes it easy for the user to just point out things they don't like and things you should change, right? And this also helps you to optimize your flow, right? Sometimes when you're designing this, you get to know that, oh, all these things are payments. Why don't I group them under pay? All these things are trying to achieve a similar purpose. Why don't I put it under this so that the user uses a numeric input to access it, right? So this is what lately I do. Yeah, but I know not everyone can do that. If you have any question, kindly write it in. You can put it in the chat, or you can put it on sticky notes or anywhere, so that when I'm done, you can actually ask. Okay, so this is what I do now for most of the customer journeys, right? All right. And then the next thing I would like to show you is the demo, right? Is a demo of the application that is the demo we are going to have today. So the demo is actually of this application. As I mentioned to you, it's a proprietary application. So I've tried as much as possible to remove the user's name from it, right? So so for the demo, I'll take you through a code walkthrough. I don't know. Uh, this is not, it's in Java, but it's not, should I say, I'll communicate in, should I say, plain language so that you understand what I'm trying to aim at, right? So this particular endpoint, so this, hmm, okay, so this is Java. I know this is Java. I'm trying to just understand your backgrounds, but let me quickly just go through it. So it uses web flags. Okay, so and it is a Spring Boot application basically. What it does is that it's an old application. I retrofitted it to fit Archicel's USSD interface so that we could actually test with Archicel's USSD server, okay, in the live test session. Okay, so when there's an incoming request from Archicel, what we do is we transform it first and foremost. So it's from Archicel, but I mentioned to you that this is an application I developed using another provider, right? So to what I do first is to take the request coming from Archicel, transform it into something that this existing application could understand, right? Then I create a transfer object from it, a data transfer object from it, right? Then I verify if the user session existed within the last 10 minutes, right? So I check if I have an existing session for this user that is open. So when there are network delays, when there are challenges that causes your your end user to experience a timeout, or there's an exception on your application, you should have a way of managing the session of the user so that You can keep it open for a specific time. So when the user comes back, you can know where the user was previously and to be able to navigate the user to that screen. Okay. And also, this helps to get to know what a user does often, right? I didn't build this application for that specific purpose, but when you keep track of the user sessions over a period, and there's a common pattern to the a way a user's interaction behaves. When the user dials the USSD shortcode, you can take the person directly to a screen where the person is likely going to land, right? And tell the person if he wants to continue from here or he wants to start all over, right? So for instance, I mentioned initially, whenever I use your USSD application, I'm always buying airtime, right? It's just nice that when I dial your USSD application, I don't have to go through the whole user journey just to buy my airtime, right? When I dial your USSD code and I see uh, you can proceed to purchase airtime. One, proceed. Two, cancel, or two, back, right? When the person clicks cancel, you can let the person restart the session from the beginning. If the person clicks proceed, you just go straight. Which amount do you want to buy? Right? And tell the person you receive a Momo prompt. It reduces the amount of time the person is supposed would spend on your application, you know. So yeah, so that's what this thing actually does. So it keeps track of open sessions. You can you can use it for anything basically. So the next thing I do is that, okay, so if the person doesn't have a session, then it means it's a new session, right? So you just take the person to the first screen, right? If the session coming in, right, is an existing session or a session that is continuing, for instance, Akiso sends you, for instance, if the user leaves for the first screen, the continue session, is it continue session? Let me see the developer documentation. So Akiso has a good documentation actually. So for a new session is always true, right? And if it's an existing session, new session is always false. So in your application, you can look at, uh, where are you? You can look at the kind of request that, is it a new session? If it's a new session, then you know that, okay, this is new. I have to let the person start from somewhere. But if I check the message type, I realize that, oh, I actually have an old session of this user. I can I can find the associated browser of the person, where the person was before they left, or if the person is still dialing the short code, where the person was previously, right? And where they are going next, right? And then you want to check if the existing session that you verified here is still open. If it's not open, if it's closed, I mean, you have to restart the person's session. If the session count is 0, you know that the person is on the new screen. And there are different ways to track sessions in USSD. I think there's a need for a different kind of training on how to manage USSD sessions, right? But I'm expecting all of us to have at least developed one or two USSD applications so we kind of know how we manage our own sessions, right? So for me, I manage sessions with user input and the number of times the person has visited my application, right? So, and I mean, and after that, I just convert the response to the one required by Akisel, right? So also after going through all these processes, what I try to do is also update the user input information so that I can always keep track of the user wherever he or she is, right? And I mentioned to you that as much as possible for for okay. Yeah, I mentioned that as much as possible, whatever you could make a background task, make it a background task. For this application, this application was built a long time ago, so we are using RabbitMQ. Most of the modern applications I work on with USSD we use Redis, right? Redis streams, right, to perform most of these event subscription and event publishing. But for this application, we are using Redis for, hey, did I say Redis? No, we are using RabbitMQ for it. For managing the sessions, uh, uh, we are using MongoDB, right? As I mentioned, we could use Redis alone for both of these items and still have a very good and high performance USSD application. Okay, so now let me just show you portions of the code where I made some changes just to adapt to this presentation. Okay, so let me see. Uh, let me find it from here. Okay. So I'm just trying to find places where we use most of these exchanges. So let me look for. So this is the USSD session manager. This is why I manage all the sessions of the user. And let me just, I'm trying to find, yeah. So this is one of the actions, right? So for instance, if I want to send an email, I publish it to RabbitMQ, and a consumer consumes from RabbitMQ. So in the meantime, when I publish to RabbitMQ, I just return a response to the user, right? I don't wait for the events to be consumed by the consumer before I just publish and then continue, right? And I think this is also done for payment. There's new payment implementation. So for payment, we should have some RabbitMQ event here as well. Let me see. Payment service. Okay, so this is the UI, and let me see. Okay, let me just globally set. Okay, utils. Okay, yeah. So registration payment engine. Yeah. So you can see I have this that publishes the payment event to RabbitMQ, right? So it publishes it to RabbitMQ, then it gets consumed and performed in the background, right? So yeah, so that's it basically for this little demo, right? And so I would go ahead and then bootstrap this application. I created a Docker Compose file. So I'll go ahead and I'll bootstrap this application so that we can all have a feel of it and we can all test it out. Yeah, okay. Oh, okay. My terminal session is timed out. Uh, let me close and restart the session again then. Oh, what happened? Minimize. Okay, so okay, let me just do it on my other screen and then come back. In the meantime, if you have any question, just put it down, write it down somewhere. We'll be coming to the questions and answers shortly. Okay. All right. I think I've logged in now. And let me see. Terminate the session. Okay. OPT and workshop. Yeah, for the workshop. So I bootstrapped the Docker Compose file I mentioned initially. So it's a simple Docker Compose file. let me just open it here. I created it today. So what it does is that it's very simple. It spins up RabbitMQ and then spins up MongoDB. Very simple, right? Spins up RabbitMQ, spins up MongoDB, gives it this default credentials, and then this also these default credentials. So this is the same thing I currently have on the server here, right? So so I'll okay, yeah, I'm not a root user. Uh, okay, so so I think it started now, and I already mapped a domain name to the RabbitMQ. So let me get that quickly. So I think it was Rabbit. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, this is the RabbitMQ I bootstrapped. And as you can see, there isn't anything related to my application here, right? And I'll show you that looking at my RabbitMQ configuration, this is this is the RabbitMQ configuration basically. So this is responsible for basically setting up the whole RabbitMQ infrastructure for communication between my application publishers or producers and consumers, or my should I say publishers, subscribers, all of that. Okay, so I publish to the exchange. There's a topic exchange, and I have defined some queues, and you can see that all of that are actually not here yet. If I go to queues, you'd realize that I don't have any queues in here. I don't have anything in here, right? And I've also uploaded the built jar file for the USSD application. So I'm just going to start it. Uh, as I mentioned, it's a Spring Boot application, and then it's going to try to find all the resources it needs to start. And then, yeah, so we can see that, let me see. Is it big enough? Is it okay? Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so you can see that the application has already started, right? And then it's not receiving any request at the moment. What I want you to notice is that reason why normally I like to use RabbitMQ is that already you can see that my channels are occupied with 4 consumers. If you look at the exchange, you can see that I have a new exchange, which is a topic exchange, just like I described in the code, right? That I want a topic exchange, right? So there are different kinds of exchange in RabbitMQ. I'm sure we can have a different session just to talk about RabbitMQ. It's a whole infrastructure on its own. And when you click the exchange, you can see the queues that are actually you can see the bindings it has and the queues that it's actually connected to, and then the routing key. If you don't know RabbitMQ, this is just to demonstrate a publish and subscribe kind of thing to you, right? So just assume it's Redis stream, it's a Kafka, or anything, right? And you can see here that I actually have some queues here. Initially, I didn't have some queues, but now you can see I have some queues that are actually running in a state running. Okay, so now I think we already configured this particular application that has started now to a domain name, and we already have it on in the account. I think Joseph gave me that's an Akisel account, so sms@akisel.com. Oh, no, no, no. sms.arcadecell.com. Yeah, I think I logged in one browser, but okay. Okay, so basically what you must know, we already did the background work. I wanted to show you where I put it, but I think if you're on this webinar, probably you use Akisel's product, and it's very easy to navigate your way through to that point. Okay. So this is the application. Okay. We already mapped it to a USSD shortcode. Joseph, can you put the shortcode in the chat so that I think uh, everyone will see, and then we can dial and interact with this USSD code, right? And then also monitor the terminal to actually see uh, what's happening once we are dialing, like as we are dialing the shortcode. Uh, okay. Joseph, are you there? Okay. Okay.
Yes, I'm putting it in the chat.
Okay. Oh, okay. It's here. USSD manager. Okay. Yeah. I think there's a shortcode. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Think let me just add it there. Joseph has already done that. So you can start dialing on your phones. We can start looking, interacting with the USSD application. We can start seeing what's actually happening with the application, right? And as I said to you, when it comes to USSD, everything is plain text, okay? So we can see the first person has dialed the code and okay. So you can see in the logs that we are verifying if the session existed in the past 10 minutes. We are checking with the phone number, right? And I want you to just interact with the application while some of us just look at the screen to see what you guys are doing. And then after this, we would have a Q&A session. Okay, I can see someone has done some payment, right? So whenever you do a payment, it's locked. The consumer just locks it. We don't send it to any network, right? I told you I edited the code to remove some dependencies. So I can see someone try to make some payment with, and I have some payment for fees, okay? And then I can see someone also made some payment, right? Yeah, so Joseph, I think we can open the floor for Q&A, right? As they test the application, we can open the floor for Q&A session. So if you have any question during the presentation, I think this is the best time to ask. And if I have an answer, I would gladly give you one.
So anyone with a question can emote with their hands up reaction, and then I'll just unmute the microphone. So, Eric, you can go ahead now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation. Very nice. I've really learned a lot. I am a bit new to this, so I'm trying very hard to understand. However, there is something that I've been thinking about for some time now, and I want to find. I actually typed my question in the chat. I don't know if you saw it, but I want to find out: is there a way that an application, as in regular, let's say Android application, can communicate with USSD, right, to achieve same results, reducing
Yeah,
the
so
burden for yeah.
Yeah, so I've seen an application like that before, and so the reason why the person built that application was to be able to encrypt the data that is
Mm,
sent between the phone or the device and uh, and the server. Now the thing is, USSD is meant for a different purpose. USSD is meant to cover you when you don't have access to internet. Even if you don't have access to internet, when you find yourself in remote locations, when you find yourself, or should I say, an add-on to an existing application that should make your life easier, right? So that's actually the purpose of the USSD. But talking about Android, so now I told you everything you see is plain text, but I've seen an Android application that uses the 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 phone's hardware devices, right? So when you dial the short code on your Android application, what's happening is that he's actually
mm.
using the, is it telephony or something? They call it something. He's actually dialing the code in the background on your device, right? And every input you put in, he's able to hash it and then send it over the wire so that on his server, he can decrypt it,
Yeah,
right? So
that
that
that is
was the
why
use
I'm asking.
case I saw for an
Right.
application like that.
Yes, the reason why I'm asking is that let's take say MTN for example. They have
Mm-hmm,
lots of short codes, right?
mm-hmm, yeah.
And personally, sometimes I have to even Google to even remember some of them, right? However, yeah. So if I have my application, right, that is running
Mm-hmm,
okay, and the limitation is that when it goes offline or user runs out of data, the app is totally dead. But
mm-hmm,
however, the service can still be accessed via USSD,
yep.
where they have to remember the code and dial again all over. And I'm thinking, okay, fine. What if there is a button in my application, or probably when they're making a request in the app and there is no internet connection, it can switch and automatically send a request via the USSD on the background to get
Okay.
similar response, right? So that the user will probably not even notice that they are doing something like that because they are getting same feedback.
Okay.
While
Okay.
asking this question, I'm just thinking about security too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whether it's secure to be doing that, for the Android application, since it will
So
be
so
dialing the code without the user knowing and all that.
So I think for every application, there are terms and conditions. You can outline it in the terms and
Right.
conditions so that the person gets to know. So it's not a violation of privacy. Okay. There are also, so Android applications and USSD applications, they serve different purposes, right? So for the
Right.
use case example you gave, like so many shortcodes on MTN. How can I memorize all of them? What you can do is have
Mhm.
an Android application that doesn't connect to the internet, but that has pre-built, should I say, that knows all the shortcodes you kind of want, right? On
Okay.
MTN, on your service
Right.
provider. And when you dial, it reaches to its cache. And then maybe when you dial, you give him a menu, buy data, blah, blah, blah. But then it reaches to its cache to actually dial the actual
Mm.
code for the user, and the user can continue or resume from the USSD itself. Or I mean, you can play around with it, but it's a territory I've not really explored, but I've seen people
Got it, right.
do some very interesting things over there.
Okay. Thank you so much. Another thing I was thinking about is, I don't just think for myself as a developer of the benefits I can get, but also since Alkicel is giving us a good service, I am thinking if there is a possibility or we can get a breakthrough from there, is a good way to actually get that same service being used by in another way, right? At the end of the day, if I'm able to implement in my system and such
Mhm,
that my system never goes offline,
mhm.
right? And my user doesn't have to worry about dialing any code. At the end of the day, I still get to utilize Akisel's USSD, but then achieving the same result without my user even dialing the code or knowing. Yeah. So Alex, thank you so much for the feedback.
Okay. Okay. Hope it was helpful. Yeah. Uh, any other question? I think I saw another question, if I am not wrong. He says, how can I start? How can start from start to this is quite confusing. Alex, can you raise your hand so that Joseph unmutes your mic so that you can ask your question? How can one start from scratch and learn how to develop USSD applications? Okay, I think that's the question. So USSD applications, it has a bit of a learning curve. Anyone who has developed any USSD application of any kind will tell you it has a bit of a learning curve, but it doesn't mean it's not possible or it's not doable. Okay, one thing I spoke about during the presentation is that managing of sessions, right, and tracking your user's journey through your application is very essential to have a good USSD application, right? So to start, I think what you should be looking out for is how to manage a session of a user, right, throughout your application, right? Starting from that, I think you can also leverage on some of Archicel's resources. Joseph mentioned that they have a YouTube channel where they put most of these kind of trainings that or workshops that are happening, right? You can go there, you can look at the information that has been presented, how much of it you can learn and how much of it you can benefit from. There's really no clear-cut way on how to, or should I say roadmap on how to learn to develop USSD application. I think the best way is just to jump in and start, right? Start with something. Okay. Alex, I hope that answers your question.
All right, then George, you can go ahead with your question now.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Good evening, good afternoon to everybody. My question was on rollbacks. So, looking at how USSD is generally structured, I wanted to know your views on how you handle situations where probably, let's say, for some reason, the organization whatsoever doesn't want you to be caching any information, right? And probably the user has reached a stage where normally you would have cached so that when they come back, they just finish up the process. But in this case, they want you to let them start all over again. So how would you handle the rollback of all the things that have been probably sent and probably updated or anything of that sort?
Hello, Alexander.
Hello,
Oh, sorry, I
was
was muted.
Yeah,
okay,
you're
okay.
right.
Sorry, I was unmuted. So what I was saying is that I think what you are actually talking about is the actual transactions that happen throughout the application, not the user sessions, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So for a USSD application, I always advise don't perform any transaction in between menu screens. Complete the end, let the person complete the entire flow. When you have the data of where the person wants to start, where the person wants to end, you perform your entire transaction in a scope, right? Now, reason I'm saying that is that you may end up mutating data that the person wouldn't complete an action for, right? And with that kind of process, it's difficult to roll back or it creates issues for you along the line. So the easiest advice I give anyone, let the person finish the process. The person wants to buy airtime, no problem. Let the person enter everything they have to enter to the last one. Let the person approve. And when the person is done, you begin the process of performing all the transactions. Do I have to check this? Do I have to check that? Do I have to do this? Do I have to do that? There are edge cases. It depends on the kind of application you are building. But should I say most of the time, most of the kind of actions you do across screens are get, right? Trying to retrieve data, but not actually mutating data. Trying to retrieve data to find out maybe a user's balance. Does he have sufficient balance to perform this action? Like those kind of simple get interactions. But for any interaction that has the effect of mutating data, I think it's appropriate to wait till the end of the entire process, then you can commence it. That's why I said that as much as possible, use background task for most of these things. When you're done, you can put it into a background task. It takes the entire session, looks at, okay, this is what the person wanted to do, and this is how the person wanted it. The person is done. Extract the required fields and perform the action on behalf of the person, right? Joe, does it answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
Does anyone have any other question? Okay, my question. Oh, okay. This is Alex's question. I think we've touched on it. Right. Okay, yeah. Interesting parables. Okay. Joseph, I think someone has their hands raised.
Yes, you can go ahead now. Perhaps you could unmute your mic and then speak now.
Yeah. Hello. Okay, does any other person have a question? I think maybe he's
So we are unable to, I think he's speaking, but we are unable to hear you, perhaps.
oh, okay. I think he's
You can also put the question in the chat if it helps. And I think Eric can go ahead now.
Okay, I have one more question.
okay.
In general, what is the
Mhm.
future of USSD? Since the emphasis has mainly been on areas with low connectivity or probably
No
poor internet
connectivity.
connection. Yeah. So what is the future of USSD? Should we wake up one day and
Okay.
have connectivity everywhere?
Okay. Okay. So I think his question is what, in my view, do I think is the future of USSD?
Yeah.
Okay. So just like I tell a few other people as well, USSD, it has outlived its time, right? More
Okay.
like SMS. We still have notifications, we have push notifications, but still we have SMSs that also are on the same GSM network as as uh, as we have USSD. So
Right.
mostly we say it's for the areas where we really don't have much internet connectivity,
Mhm.
but
Okay.
it's still useful, right? In most of the developing countries, or yeah, it's still useful in most of the developing countries because that's what uh, most, should I say, people in the outskirts of town, even those within, it's the easiest way to buy airtime, though you can use the Momo app, is to use USSD if you don't have data. The easiest way to buy data is to use USSD because you don't have to pay for anything, right? So it's still useful, right? Looking at its future, in my opinion, I think it's still useful and would be useful for at least a few more years or a lot more years, right? Depending on the
Okay.
demands of the current market, right? So
Right.
in my opinion, is what I think is the future of USSD. But I can't say for sure, right? because there are other countries. If you go to Kenya, it's widely used like crazy. Tanzania, Rwanda, these USSDs are like hotcake. Unlike Ghana, where it's used but not really much, you know.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Parable's hand is still up. We have okay. There's someone else's hand up. Okay, Eric.
So
Eric, you
parables
just
actually
asked the
came
question,
back.
right?
Oh, can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, yeah,
Hello, can
we
you hear
can
me?
hear you, but it's
Yeah.
very soft.
Hello? Yeah, we can hear you, but okay. I'm more interested in the data security side. So somebody has investigated going to get it. I can tell you because you have sometimes you have to have the major application of you got to function about it. So one thing you also do is we are trying to kind of provide an interface for our web app through this interface. Right. I don't think you can hear me. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yeah, but it's not so clear.
Hello.
If you could type your
Yeah,
question,
but it's not so clear.
so
Like,
it
if you
yeah.
type your question, okay, then let me take it to the text. I think I heard it posted on the chat. I was asking about the question first. Okay, how to keep the data secure because we are putting sensitive information, right? Like pool codes and other stuff, afterwards, all the type of sections. So how do you kind of encrypt it or protect it from the user from the user side? Not the software that can encrypt it, but I don't know how to do it in transit or probably on the end of the user.
If someone really heard the question, the person can re-echo it. I really struggle to understand. Joseph, did you hear like the question?
No, I couldn't likewise. So I think it would be best he pastes the question in the chat.
Types it in the chat. Okay. So I think can we continue whilst I think he types in the chat. If anyone sees his question, I heard him talking about session, but I can't really figure out exactly. Okay, Abdul. Yeah. Joseph, I think, yeah. Okay, you can unmute your mic now. Yeah.
Good evening.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
The only, like there's one question I would like to know about use of USSD. Like I want to know, like for using USSD for payments and all those kind of things. I want to know under the implementation process, are you required to contact your country's network service providers for any like API keys to be able to make payments on their network? Because looking at it, it seems like most network service providers does not just allow you to like use their system on your own without any like contact or any security. Because most of them will just they need you like what do we call it? Maybe a public API key or something like that before you can be able to. Yeah.
Okay. I think I got a glimpse of the question. Okay. Hello. Okay, I think I heard a bit of the question, which has to do with USSD integration with payments and why most providers don't allow you direct access to their payment gateways. So USSD and payments, they are two different things, right? Uh, payment gateways provided by the telcos, they're also provided by the telcos, are a different product. Hello. Yeah. So
Yeah, I can
payment
hear you.
gateway provided by telcos is a different product, right? And USSD provided by telcos is a different product. Now, just like every product has its own requirements, integrating into any payment gateway has its own requirements as well. So I believe once you're able to meet the requirements of either the third party vendor that is guiding you to the telco, or directly you're able to meet the requirements of the telco directly, they would give you access. I know MTN gives direct access via their portal, right? And I know Vodafone, Airtel, Tigo, you have to go through a bit of a hassle, but it's possible once you meet the requirements, right? The easiest way around this is to go with a payment aggregator that already has an existing relationship with all the payment providers, including banks. I mean, payment is not just limited to the telcos, but banks as well, right? So once I believe once you're able to meet the criteria required to integrate your USSD into a payment gateway or a payment service provider, once you're able to satisfy them enough, they will provide you with their documentation and help you out with your integration as well, right? I hope that answers your question, if I
Okay.
heard your question right.
Thank you. Yeah, it does. It does.
All right, so I have Parable's question here. So he was asking about securing data during the session. He wants to know how we can handle sensitive data like PIN codes and passwords, especially on the user's end and while in transit, that is from the mobile device handset to Akicel's gateway to his application server. He wants to know where we can, specifically where we can secure the data. So where do we secure the data, and then I think how you can do that on a server as well.
I think I answered this question in the initial presentation. I mentioned that USSD is based on the GSM network and it's based on bits of data that are transferred, right, from the handset through the cell phone tower, through the HLR or VLR, through the gateway provider of the telco, and then to Akicel's gateway and downstream. Now, everything there is plain text. As a developer, this is one thing you should know. Everything in transit there is plain text, right? No data from your device to the HLR is encrypted, right? It's just that you don't see it, right? Now, no data from the HLR to the telco forwarding that to you is encrypted, right? So what happens is that mostly access to this kind of information is gotten when it is stored in databases, right? What happens is Akicel stateless. We only keep user sessions. We don't keep user data. We only keep user sessions. And what we try to provide you, whenever we try to provide you detailed data, then it means that we must dig deep into some of our file systems to be able to get it for you, right? So that's basically it. So data in transit, it's plain text. There's no encryption. Where data leaks is when you receive it at your end and you persist it, and you persist it in plain text, right? Anyone building a report of your application, anyone with access to your database now have access to all of these things, right? What you can trust is the partners you are dealing with. So you trust Akicel not to give your data out. You trust the telcos not to give your data out, right? But then you ensure you secure your applications and ensure that sensitive data that you are persisting in your data store is encrypted. Okay. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, so I believe he might not be able to
Yeah,
speak now,
George.
but yeah.
Yeah, it somewhat answers my question, but I just wanted to know if you've seen a real life example of a security risk, or if possible, I don't know if you ever heard of this situation. I think it was University of Energy and National Resources. I think at some point in time they wanted to try to use USSD for their um, SRC elections or something, and caused a security breach. It was all messed up. So I just wanted to know, even with us understanding it, do you have any example, and probably at what point do you think was the security flaw?
Okay. So I think I said initially. So the thing is, from my experience, and this is from my experience, right? What I've noticed over the years is that for data to be breached for USSD, it's not when the data is in transit, but when the data is received at the receiving party's end. So, for example, as a developer, when you develop your USSD application, right, to handle, let's say, voting, right, the only time it gets messed up is when you receive the information, how your code is written to interpret that information to make sense, right? In transit, I told you, everything is plain text, everything is stateless. What you can actually do is that if mostly the telco, because of most of their privacy policy laws, they won't share it with you. Archisel, based on its privacy policy laws, would not directly share it with you unless you are the owner, right, of the application, and then you have provided the necessary details to validate, right? So that's why whenever you're registering the USSD application, it's required for you to upload your business certificate. Customer support follows up to call you, sometimes to ask you for additional information, right? And this is to actually to ensure that if you are coming back for any information, right, that requires or that sits in line with the company's privacy and policy laws, they actually have to ensure that your request you are coming in with is from a valid person and from the one who actually created the or who is the owner, the actual owner of the USSD. Now, security breaches for USSD, personally, I'm yet to see any in real life. Okay. But what I've noticed is that when the data reaches the developer, that's where the problem is, right? I've worked on applications with a lot of different businesses, different use cases, and I noticed that most USSD developers they develop without security in mind, right? For example, you are creating a pin on your application for a user to authorize transaction, and you go into the database, you realize the pin is plain text. It's not done anywhere. It's bad practice, right? But you notice that people still do this. You know, that's what I've noticed. Most of the security flaws, it sits when the end user or the developer of the application doesn't really do due diligence to ensure that the data they are storing is encrypted or hashed. Any sensitive data that is supposed to be hashed, you ensure it is, right? Any data that is not supposed to be in plain sight, you don't log it, right? You see people logging sensitive information in their logs, right? We don't do that, right? So those are where most of the security issues start from, right? And I believe if USSD developers take the mantle to ensure that most of most of these security concerns on their application level is addressed, then it's very difficult. I won't say you won't, but it's very difficult to have a security issue, you know. I hope it answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, Alexander, just to top what you mentioned, right? So you've also noticed that with the USSD applications, which are basically just API endpoints that are developed by developers, right? They don't utilize the user ID, or let me say the secret ID that identifies the USSD extension that you have, right? Now that
Okay.
particular field there, because it's more or less like a gibberish test, right? A random test can be used to identify the source of the request you're receiving, and also to just to implement some sort of authentication to make sure that okay, the data you are receiving, right, is from Akisel. And then also the data, the response you are going to give, because the request is from Akisel, your response is going to the direct the right source, right? Because so mostly people leave their APIs open so that they could test it out in Postman. But then in production, leaving it open also makes it vulnerable in what? In production.
Yeah. And Joseph, to even add up to it, you could also even restrict your USSD application as part of your security checks. You could restrict where you receive API requests from, right? You know, Akisel is your provider. Akisel always provides you with the data that is submitted on a specific IP. Ensure that only that IP is allowed by your application to receive traffic. Do you get it? You don't allow traffic from just anywhere, because you know that, okay, it's from Akisel. I ensure I verify that the user ID that I was given is exactly the user ID I'm getting in my request. Number two, I also ensure that the IP it's coming from is actually Akisel's dedicated USSD IP, not from just anywhere. You know, some of these measures, when you put it in place, it helps to enhance your application security. Uh, any more questions? Okay. Joseph, I think the questions is done, so I'll just go ahead to the conclusion of this presentation. Give me a moment to pull up the. Okay, so enter full screen. All right, so I think we've discussed some practical use cases. We've discussed some challenges as well, and what I want to say in summary, okay. Uh, what I want to say in summary is that this presentation is purely based on my experiences, right? These are not copy paste notes. These are from things that I've experienced over a period, right? And the demo that you saw or that you interacted with is something that I worked on in real life, right? And all these things are based on my experience. So I'm sure you also have your own experiences, but this workshop is supposed to give you more of a stepping stone, right? So that you know how to do things right, right? When you are building your USSD applications, to basically leverage on my experience to build your USSD applications. So in this entire session, we spoke about what USSDs are, the flow of USSD from the handset. We spoke about optimizing user experience. We spoke about dealing with session timeouts, session latencies. There are things you can't control, like I told you before. If the network provider is giving you issues, it's difficult to manage sessions, right? Because sessions time out, even when it's not time for them to time out, right? There are inconsistencies and all of that. So we spoke about dealing with some of these session time out, dealing with network latencies when you are actually performing third-party requests and all that. We also spoke about efficient data management strategies and storage, right? We mentioned that always ensure that sensitive data is encrypted. If you don't want to encrypt it, you can hash it, right? Ensure that it's not plain text that anyone can read and make meaning of, okay? We also spoke about some design patterns with USSD that easily makes your user journeys a bit more expressive and a bit more easy on your end user. And we spoke about efficient data management. I think we've already touched on efficient data management. Yeah, so this is what we discussed for then for this long session. And I want to say thank you for joining this session. I want to especially say thank you for some of my colleagues that decided to jump on this session to support me. Emmanuel, I want to say I'm very grateful. I think I've seen you in the chat. I think I've also seen Kwame. I think I saw Kwame somewhere. So I want to say thank you for joining to support me. And I want to say thank you to Akisel for also giving me the opportunity to share some of my experiences with you so that you could leverage on them and then build high performance USSD applications, right? And it's my hope that one day you would build USSD applications without issues, USSD applications that run and you don't have to think about them, right? So thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening. Yeah, Joseph, thank you.
All right.
Over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Alexander. All right, so our time is far spent. We'll be ending here, but I only have some few notes to share. So the recording of this meeting will be prepared and then shared, published on our YouTube channel. An email will be sent out to all the participants of today's webinar, and then it would include the link to the YouTube playlist, as well as a little survey to get your feedback on the webinars as well. So I think that is it for today. We can end it here. Thank you all for joining the session, and seeing the next one.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.